Hello, it is Lamus57 here, back with the second episode of Inept Intellectual, and today I will be fulfilling the promise which I made last time. Today we will be diving into a specific subject, that being the Eugenics found in Plato's 7th chapter of the Republic. And just to clarify, for the sake of honesty, I've not finished the Republic. I'm only halfway through now. So if this topic gets expanded upon in further chapters, I will amend this then. And also, I am drawing from the Oxford World Classics edition, translated by Robin Waterfeld. So yes, to the topic of Plato's Eugenics. So to summarize, Plato believes that for the next generation of the Guardians to be as strong as possible, and for them to be ever increasing and better than the previous generation, the state needs to control marriages between individuals. Marriages in this context basically just means, sexual pairings. So the state must control sexual pairings between the Guardians to elicit the strongest children. And, of course, the goal of this is to create a stronger next generation. Here, let me read you from the man himself. This is section 459D. It follows from our conclusions so far that sex should preferably take place between men and women who are outstandingly good, and should occur as little as possible between men and women of vastly inferior stamp. It also follows that the offspring of the first group should be brought up, while the offspring of the second group shouldn't. This is how to maximize the potential of our flock, and the fact that all this is happening should be concealed from everyone except the rulers themselves, if the herd of guardians is to be as free as possible from conflict. So what does all this mean? Let's go from the start to the bottom of this, key paragraph here. So, he starts off with a proposition that, sex, in this case, for procreation, should take place preferably, between men and women who are impressive, who are extraordinary in some way. Later on in the chapter, he outlines, courage in battle as a specific example of something an individual can do, which will earn them a favorable pairing from the state. And then he also makes the assertion that this procreation should occur as little as possible between less impressive individuals. This may be unpalatable to us. Honestly, obviously the whole eugenics program is unpalatable to the modern mind, but this is Plato, and leave your modern biases at the door, I guess, would be all I could tell you. Anyways, so I think that if we're honest with ourselves, he's correct here. Or, he is correct in what he's identifying here. People who are well put together and are naturally better off and better disposed make better children who go on to lead more successful lives. And the reverse is true. Two poor individuals with bad character come together and almost always make a child who is below par. Despite the fact that, that's not currently what we sort of like to think, it is almost certainly true. You can clearly see it. And also, it just logically follows. The tall father will make a tall son. The robust father will make a robust son. The weak and sickly and small father will make a weak and sickly and small son. And, of course, it would be intolerable for the guardians of our republic to be weak, sickly, or small. So we should only have pairings which are maximally effective in creating good offspring. Well, not only, but it should be geared towards that. It should be geared to every generation being superior to the ones before it, and over time, this will increasingly select for better and better genes, so that our guardians remain a real aristocracy and capable of ruling. Anyways, the next part of this is the part that perhaps gets really morally dubious, like, to us moderns. He talks about how, the children of these good relationships should be brought up. And in a different part of this chapter, he describes how they must be brought up by being taken from the parents to a nursery, and every child is not allowed to know their biological parents. Every parent is not allowed to know their biological child, and the guardians essentially just act as one large family. They do not have, the possessives of my mother and my brother, which refer to specific people. Your brother is all the other men. Your sisters are all the other women. Your nieces are, just all the younger women. It's removing these specific family roles, which Plato claims will bring disunity to the guardians, which is, of course, the ultimate Platonic condemnation is disunity. And, he also says that children of poor pairings and, those disabled children from what should be good pairings will be exposed and abandoned in, the wilderness. He says shouldn't be brought up, but, of course, this is ancient Greece. They're going to expose the child, as the Spartans did. And, this seems brutal, right? It does seem very brutal to us who has our concept of morality is much different from Plato's. In the typical modern, Western liberal view of morality, inflicting harm on a baby like this, who is sort of definitionally innocent, it doesn't even have the facilities to do wrong, really. Killing it is extremely immoral under our views, where you don't bring harm to people unless they bring harm upon you. But Plato's goal here, and what he believes is moral, is maximizing goodness, both in the community and in the individuals which comprise the community. So, these disabled and poorly put together babies, which will grow into weak and poor stock adults, allowing them to survive and grow and weaken the guardianship of the community, is immoral under that view. It is decreasing the goodness of the guardians, which necessarily decreases the goodness of the community, which decreases the happiness of the community, and it's immoral. So from the Platonist point of view, this is the moral thing. If there's a baby that's born that is disabled, or it was from a pairing outside the blessings of the state, or perhaps the state made a mistake and they paired two people which just didn't produce a good baby, for whatever reason, if there's a baby of poor stock, it must be exposed so that we're not creating a bad adult. And, this is how to maximize the potential of our flock. It's pretty self-explanatory. You want to maximize the potential of the guardians, because, ultimately what Plato says about natural predisposition is, of course the baby does not come out of the womb, knowing how to rule, knowing how to be a truly good guardian, being of that golden caste, as he, outlines in the so-called noble lie of, the minerals in men. The baby, of course, does not come out knowing how to rule, but it's a natural predisposition. The sickly, bent over, underweight baby is not going to grow into the same caliber of individual as the healthy, strong baby from strong, healthy, vital, and virtuous parents. So, it's an aptitude thing, of course. We want to be raising people for the guardianship, which have the potential and the capability to be great at the job, because that is what's required for the safety of the Republic and the happiness of all the individuals which comprise it. And, the next part is interesting, and this is sort of a whole tangent. We sort of brushed on another noble lie Plato talked about, in an earlier section of the book. This is a different noble lie. And the fact that all this is happening should be concealed from everyone except the rulers themselves. So, essentially, only the ruling class, like the real ruling guardians, those in charge of legislating, are privy to this program of eugenics. The commoners, the laborers, of course, are not, and the auxiliaries also wouldn't be. And this is necessary because, in my view, the reason why this is necessary, he says, if the herd of guardians is to be as free as possible from conflict. The wise rulers are the only ones in the Republic truly capable of distancing themselves from the desires enough to where they would not come to violence or to conflict over this. Because, of course, who gets to breed with who gets to sleep with who, it's a very competitive aspect of human nature, as it was in ancient times, and even today. The best man gets the best girl. And, of course, that is how it is here. But the human nature is often, to violently take this. If you might have the desire to beat up the boyfriend of the girl you like to win her heart, or something to that effect. But this is obviously, this kind of thing, it can't be allowed in the Republic. And not only can, this physical conflict not be allowed, but even feelings of dislike and distaste and anger and jealousy cannot be allowed among the guardians. Plato says in a different section of this very chapter, pardon me a moment, let me see if I can find the correct page. Yes, here it is. And this is section 462a. Quote, "And isn't it the sharing of feelings of pleasure and distress which binds a community together, when, insofar as it is feasible, the whole citizen body feels more or less the same pleasure or distress at the same gains and losses?" Later he goes on in the same section. This is actually section 462c, but whatever. "And isn't it, on the other hand, the non-sharing of these feelings which causes disintegration, when something happens to the community or some of its members, and the attendant feelings range from depression to delight?" So, despite the fact that I sort of butchered that there, I do apologize. What Plato's getting at is there must be unity in feeling among the Republic, particularly among the guardians, to the highest degree which is possible, to create true unity. Because, how can you truly be united with other people when an event takes place and some are anguished and upset and others are happy? There's, of course, no unity there, and this disagreement of emotion will inevitably breed conflict, and this is unacceptable to Plato. So, we cannot let our emotions run high on this eugenics program. We can't let people compete over it. We can't have young men feeling jealous and upset at their betters when they mate with the girl that they have been coveting. That cannot be permitted. But, this is another one of Plato's noble lies. I believe he describes it as medicine at a certain point. Essentially, it is a lie. There is a eugenics program, even though, we will not be telling the people that, because it is healthier for them not to know. It'll create a more unified, stable republic with a more happy citizenry if we lie to them and they do not know. This is, similar to the other noble lie, as previously said, of, there's a golden caste, and then there's silver, and then, the commoners have iron and copper in them. Similar concept. It's a lie. Plato doesn't claim it's the actual truth as things really are, but it's a useful lie to for moral reasons, for goodness in the republic and an individual. So yes, this his whole program of eugenics I think is very interesting, along with the broader family relationships of the guardians. Another thing, which is a big part of this chapter, it's called Women, Children, and Warfare after all, is the equality of women in the guardianship. The women guardians are they're held to the same tasks. They even go to war. They're women auxiliaries, and they rule and they do all the same things. They are equal because Plato says that although overall men are perhaps the more the stronger sex, there are certainly women who are naturally endowed with the aptitude for ruling or politics or war. And it would be immoral to bar these women from fulfilling their duties, because that's the whole point. The sort of central idea on which this whole rests is that each individual pursues the task to which they are most suited. So if we are barring women from this merely on the basis of their sex, you're denying the republic of potentially very lethal warriors and potentially courageous women and wise leaders that it could have otherwise had, which is immoral and will decrease the happiness of your community. And will also introduce discord because, women may be upset at their position as a lesser, fairly understandably so. And this cannot be tolerated. So, he even says that the women will be naked as they exercise with the men. They will be equal in a lot of ways. These guardian women will... I mean, basically, from what I picked up here, it's like a near total equality. He does, say that women are the weaker sex overall, and he does say that, perhaps, we'll give them lighter loads on the work. But overall, it is remarkably equal, at least at the rank of the guardians for women in this republic. And the concept of splitting the family I also find very interesting. Because essentially the reason why you have to do this is because the guardians cannot have any possessions, right? They don't own money, they don't own like little trinkets, like they don't own things. They own nothing but their body. So if and this is because you don't want, again, possession sort of breeds disunity and it breeds conflict and it breeds like, oh, they have more money than me and this is a problem and I need to gain money, and that it breeds discord. And Plato says it would be the same thing had you, introduce sort of these direct familial relations into the community. When you have like your in particular daughter and your in particular son, who you really want to look out for above everybody else, that is disunity. You're taking preference, just purely based on nothing to do with aptitude or anything. You were just taking preference based on blood relation. And this cannot be permitted. All the other men are your brothers, and all the other women are your sisters, and he outlines a specific thing of who you call your daughter, and who you are not allowed to have sex with, since we aren't keeping track of familial relations, and we don't really want men having sex with their biological daughters on accident. But that's sort of irrelevant to the task here. Also, there is one line, I believe. Let me find it quickly. Pardon me. Oh yes. However, the law will allow brothers and sisters to sleep together. If the lottery turns out that way, and the Delphic Oracle is no objection. Now, since I... regarding the context of that paragraph, I do believe he means biological brothers and sisters, which is very curious. Although, he may mean brothers and sisters in the way he defines it. That's very possible. I'm not going to go back and reread the whole thing right now. I've wasted enough time. But yes, it's this whole program of eugenics and familial relations at the level of the guardians is Very interesting. And honestly, I find it pretty compelling. I think the the two of the major problems with our current republic, the American Republic, which is far removed from Plato's ideal republic, is disunity, atomization, of course, and you sort of have your people and you stick to your people, and there really isn't a overarching body. There doesn't feel to be a family in the community. Certainly not at the high levels of government. And also, you know, uh, oftentimes, in contemporary America, certainly, when you see a couple with a child, it is not the couple that should be having a child. They are ugly, dysgenic, and their child is glued to an iPad in the supermarket. And then the people who are rich and attractive and well off do not have children, which is just another aspect of how backwards our system is. But anyways, this is obviously a problem. The next generation is going to be fundamentally and naturally weaker than the last. You can't have a forward progressing society that way, or even a stable one, frankly. So I think us moderns might a lot of us moderns might pinch our nose at this and be like, oh no, eugenics is bad. We can't have that. But I think you need to give Plato his due. He's certainly much smarter than you and I, and the fact that he died nearly 400 years before Christ, lived and died nearly 400 years before Christ, does not necessarily is not necessarily a refutation of this idea. I really think if you're listening or if you're reading the Republic and you sort of turn your nose at this and scoff, you should examine it further and you should look at the world around you and you should think, maybe we would all be better off with a little eugenics. But anyways, now we've touched on the women and children and the eugenics aspect of this chapter entitled Women, Children, and Warfare. Now for the warfare aspect, which I think is a smaller section of the chapter, but is certainly interesting and worth giving its due. Pardon me a moment. Yes, so first of all, the army will be the auxiliaries, the army by its very nature will not be comprised as cowards, because cowards will not be put in the army. They will be laboring. The auxiliaries are definitionally not cowards, because they're the necessary part of being an auxiliary in the Republic, of course, is courage and bravery. Of course, this is a natural antithesis to cowardliness. But yes, I think Plato definitely gave a lot of interesting ideas to chew on in this chapter. I do apologize. Actually, I don't know if you could notice the cut there, but I did just come back from several hours of being away from this recording. So I'm not exactly plugged into the mindset. But, I think sort of to sum this all up, and this is something sort of striking about the Republic in general, I think, is on the one hand, it is a very prescient work. It feels very relevant, just due to the fact, I think, of just its sheer importance and influence in Western thought. And there are some things that it's like, in our modern society, that it's like, Plato was bringing forth here in this very book. But then there's also things that really remind you that this man was deeply, deeply the world of the 400s BC, which Socrates lived, and this is set, and so Plato was writing in 300s, but whatever. Plato lived in the 300s at least, but that time is so fundamentally different than our own. It's almost hard for the modern mind to really comprehend. Yet, that is true. And then also, this Platonic figure is so dominant even today that there's some things in this book that are still. I mean, it's all relevant. I think Plato's one of the greatest in the Western canon, so of course it's all relevant. Um, Even just to expand one's horizons and just to give, like, just that alone is deeply valuable. But yeah, as I said, there are things on the one hand that are very prescient, even to our modern day, yet other things that are just so far out of time. But yes, the final thing I want to touch on in this chapter is the section about war with others. Um, Socrates, also, I need to apologize for something. Um, I know that sometimes I say Plato and Socrates sort of interchangeably. Trust me, like, I know that they're not, but I hope you can, just when I'm sort of speaking, I hope you can understand why I would say. But yes, just understand that sometimes when I say Plato says something, it is Socrates saying it, but of course it's Plato writing it, and I'm sure you understand. But anyways, I think the final thing I want to touch on, as I said, was warfare. Was Socrates's distinction between intra-Greek warfare and warfare with other nations. So, in the text, actually, Socrates says that we shouldn't call war, with other Greeks war at all. It should be just conflict. We have conflict in them, with them, sort of, how you fight with family members or friends. You may have a period of disagreement, but at the end of the day, you still are family, and so you don't go scorched earth, you don't raise their lands, you don't rape their women. You may take some grain to feed your army, but you don't slaughter. You don't make war on the entire city. You just make war on the aspect of the city which has brought you to war. Because they're your brothers fundamentally. And on the other hand, he makes the distinction of, when we're fighting non-Greeks, and then all bets are off. We can and we will raise their lands. That is war. That is the nature of it. It's a total war with other nations. There's no brotherhood. There's no camaraderie there. It is just victory and defeat. And some of this is sort of me pontificating past what Socrates directly says, but I think this is like a reasonable extension of the things he directly says. But perhaps take me with a grain of salt here. But I think that this idea is very important. It's sort of, in the modern world, in this sort of rules-based political order between nations, we like to pretend that everything's on equal footing, But at the end of the day, that's not so. As an example, if the European nations had taken this to heart at the start of the 20th century, perhaps they would have never lost their place. Perhaps they would have realized that, if we cannot wage these total wars against our brother nations. It's tragic and it's ridiculous. We will lose our place among the world if we do this. So perhaps if they had read Plato a little more closely, we would have never had the two great assisted Western suicides. World War I and World War II. I I realize that term is sliding me dangerously close to wereaboo territory. I promise. Promise that's not the case, but that's not what we're getting into. But yes, I just think that is a very important thing to keep in mind, is that all nations are not co-equal, and they're not just blank slates. And it is fair and it is good to treat the nations which you are close to, just as it is fair and good to treat your group. It is fair and good to prefer your group, and there are different rules when you're coming in with a different group, and I'll sort of leave it at there for now. But yes, overall, Chapter 7 of the Republic, very interesting. Surprisingly contemporary views on women. Well, I mean, contemporary is a misnomer. Surprisingly similar to our contemporary views on women, which I found curious, very curious. But logically, it does follow from his arguments. I feel like that's sort of undeniable. So you have to give it to Socrates. The woke mind virus got him. No, but yeah, I mean, I don't really have. I think those are all my thoughts for now. Another thing I will say though is I'm slightly confused about this version. When I cite from the book and I'm talking about this book, I'm going to refer to chapters, but then also, when I read directly, I will quote the section. But I understand that the Republic itself is actually split into 10 books, and this Oxford Classics translation I have is 14 chapters. So I will not give you the number book it appears in because I do not know. But you can just when I read a direct quote, I will give you the section. Also earlier, I know I forget the exact number. I believe I was quoting section 462. I said I gave a section number and I said A when I meant B, basically. I'm sure you can catch that if you're following along with your own copy of the Republic, but that is my mistake. It will happen again, I can assure you. But yes, I not to repeat myself, but I'll finally give my succinct opinions on Chapter 7. The eugenics argument was really the thing that's stuck in my brain the most. The eugenics, it's so fundamentally different from what we consider to be right and good in the West. But if you buy Plato's assumptions, which I'm not sure I do, but if I were to subscribe to these sort of large moral claims, I think Plato makes a strong case for being right about his assumptions. If I were to buy into the concept of these sort of moral claims of what is moral, what is not, I think makes a strong argument if you are inclined that direction, which again, not necessarily am, but if you follow some of Plato's assumptions, which again, aren't crazy, it does logically follow. It just does. So, I mean, if you're it's very interesting when you're confronted like things like that in books, because now I'm sort of having the thought that yeah, I mean that seems like a fair case for eugenics, and you can argue it's taking away individual liberty and all those sorts of things, but the next generation would be better, and the Republic would be superior if we followed this program that Plato lays out. And perhaps individual liberties are more important. I'm not sure I agree, just considering the worth of the average person. But yes, it's definitely something interesting to think about. I'll leave you to your own opinions, dear viewer. But one thing I will say is this is something I really had to drill into my head when I picked up this book, because I'm naturally very skeptical about a lot of the sort of assumptions and basic claims Plato makes. Because as I said, my sort of Nietzschean background and my my reluctance of such things, especially the section in, God, I forget, might have been chapter 4, where he's talking about how you have to censor Homer and Achilles. That really enraged me almost to a degree. I felt disgusted reading what he had to say about that. But if anything Plato says makes you react so viscerally, you do have to take a step back and examine yourself. Or really, okay, here's how I put this succinctly. Plato is one of the greatest minds, I think, to ever walk the earth. Reading only half of this book has convinced me of that. There's just something about it, you know. I mean, of course, on the surface, it is good and deep and properly, it took a genius to make something like this, even on the surface. But it really does have a way of worming its way in your mind that I think only somebody truly genius could concoct. And Plato being such this dominating, colossal figure that you must give him his due. No matter what he expresses that you disagree with, and you may end disagreeing with him too. That's fine. He's not omnipotent, certainly. Far from it. He's but a man, as with all of us, but you have to give him his due. You really do. He is a towering figure, and if you're approaching any of his arguments with anything less than a open mind, I think you are committing a grave sin of ignorance and arrogance. Yeah, I mean, perhaps that's redundant. I'm sure everybody knows that Plato's a genius, but that's just one thing I want to stress. If you hear the word eugenics and it makes you squirm, I didn't have such a problem with that. I had much more of a problem with his anti-heroic bent. But anyway, if anything Socrates says makes you squirm, do not maybe look within yourself and interrogate your beliefs before coming at Plato. And then you can come at Plato still, but you have to give him his due. Do not react emotionally before truly considering his argument to the height of your intellectual capacity. And even then, understand that you very well could be wrong. He is smarter than you. He's smarter than me. That goes for a lot of authors, obviously, but Plato does feel like a very good example of that. But yes, anyways, I believe that's about all I have to say today. I've been a pleasure hosting this podcast. This was still a little more disjointed than I would like, ideally. But overall, I think this was an improvement over the first episode in terms of direction and holding to a subject. But yes, I had a lot of fun, and thank you for listening. This has been Lamest57 with Inept Intellectual, Episode 2. See ya.